everybody. Welcome back to another Expert Exchange. My name is Morgan Taylor. I'm with the Houston Apartment Association. I'm the editor of Abode magazine here at HAA. I'm going to be your moderator today with our new host, Betsy Marshall of Allied-Orion. Today is Wednesday, October 28th, and today's topic is on collecting rent amid COVID-19. Before we turn it over to our host, I'm going to review some housekeeping items. As a quick reminder, Expert Exchange is now on Wednesdays, so I'm sure you guys know that if you're joining us today. It's always on the second and fourth Wednesday of each month. And if you can't join us ever for whatever reason, we have them stored on our HAA TV YouTube channel. So you can always check them out there. For our viewers today, please ask any questions that you may have in the Zoom chat box or in the comments via Facebook Live. Once we get through the questions that we curated, we'll get to your questions. This is a micro webinar, so we're going to try to keep this session to our 30-minute time window. A quick disclaimer, we are not public health experts nor attorneys. This webinar is provided for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal or professional advice. No member should act on the basis of any material contained in the webinar without obtaining proper legal or other professional advice specific to their situation. Please consult with your management company or property owner to address specific issues and to form your own company guidelines. With that, I'll turn it over to our host, Betsy Marshall.
Hi, thanks, Morgan. My name is Betsy Marshall, and I'm with Allied-Orion Group, and I'm happy to be your host today. And I want to also shout out to Gina Irwin. She hosted this series leading up to this session and did an amazing job. So we thank her, and I hope to take the baton and keep the conversation going. Today, we're going to talk about collecting rent amid COVID-19. We're talking to our expert today, Shelley Russell. Hi, Shelley. Shelley is a regional manager with Morgan. She has 20 years of experience in the multifamily industry. She's been with the Morgan Group for almost 6 years. Her portfolio includes multiple Class A and lease-up assets in the Houston and Austin markets. She's been active in HAA for 8 years and has earned her CAM and her CAPS credentials. We're very pleased to have Shelley with us today to help us navigate this topic.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Shelley. Okay, so I want to jump off really quick talking about kind of pre-COVID. So how were you guys collecting rent pre-COVID?
So because most of our portfolio is fairly new, having opened in the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of our properties, when they opened, automatically opened with online collections, electronic payments. But we do still receive checks in our offices because we do have residents who prefer to pay that way. But predominantly, we collect rents through online payments.
And have you seen that shift from COVID? Have you created any different requirements or anything? Do you see people are paying more online? How has that changed since this new situation we're all dealing with?
You know, for us, we haven't seen a big change because we had so many people already paying online, and that really hasn't changed as far as the collection process goes, as far as collecting those rents. Yeah.
Okay. And do you think that has helped a lot for the fact that you have so many people paying online?
I think it really does. I mean, for a time there, we had our offices closed. It was around rent payment time. I feel that if we had still been in the world of collecting those check payments primarily, that would have really been a challenge, not just for our on-site teams, but also for our customers who may not feel comfortable coming into a public environment. So online payments has certainly been a huge benefit to us, and a huge benefit having already had it in place at most of our properties and being the primary form of payment.
Okay. And did you promote that any more than normal, or was it, did you do anything differently to encourage that method of collection?
We certainly do. When the shutdown started happening and we realized we were going to partially or fully close our offices to the public, we did send out a lot of reminders and access to the portal and instructions on how to get on the portal and set up those online payments, because we definitely wanted everybody to take advantage of that as much as possible.
But you're not, you haven't gotten to the point where you're restricting or limiting the ability for people to still come in and pay in person?
We have not restricted that.
Okay.
But it's a fairly few number that are paying that way.
Gotcha. Well,
I don't know if other companies.
okay. But it sounds
Sorry.
like promoting, yeah, no, but it sounds like promoting it and encouraging it has been enough to get a lot of participation through that manner, to make it safe, not only for the residents, but the employees, and just kind of limit that person to person interaction.
Absolutely. And certainly the handful of properties where we had more check payments coming in, we did see a shift of people finally kind of getting online and participating in those online payments because, whereas they previously were more comfortable paying with that check payment, COVID really did kind of change their minds a little bit. And people who had not gotten on board before, we definitely saw some shift there for sure.
Yeah, it seems like that's kind of a new silver lining, I think, of this.
For sure.
It's because it's so much easier when people pay online. I mean, I don't think that we realize how much time and effort we get into that, but
yeah.
Okay, great. So then, and I know, when I was kind of introducing you, I talked about how you do service other markets. I'm curious, how have you noticed anything different, comparing Austin to Houston or any of the other markets when it comes to how, like the collection rates are going or anything notable?
Nothing notable. What we've seen across our Texas markets has been fairly consistent among all of them. The collections have been very, very high. I mean, we're always in the mid to high 90s, and that's across all of our portfolio in Texas. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we got you back.
Can you hear me? Okay. Sorry, I saw funny expressions. Outside of Texas, we do due to COVID. But that's yeah. Oh, okay. I was like, everybody can hear me now?
We're hearing you. You're going in and out a little bit and you're frozen, but that's okay. So you were saying that for the most part, for the most part, the collections have, yes.
No. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Am I frozen?
Shelley? Yeah, I'm going to give her a minute to get caught up, but from what I did hear, that the collections have been pretty similar across the multiple markets that the Morgan Group services. So that's interesting. If there's anybody else that has those multiple markets and so forth. So did you have anything else to add to that? Now that we looks like we got you back, everything's been fairly consistent.
Fairly consistent. We have one market outside of Texas where we've seen higher delinquencies, but across the rest of our portfolio, they've been high, 95+% collection.
Okay, and that's consistent with before too. So that's your average. It's what you're usually.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, very little change. Very little change for us.
Congratulations. Have you used any of the local, whether it's Baker Ripley or any of the other funds that are available to the different regions?
We did. We certainly participated in the first round of Baker Ripley. We certainly had residents take advantage of that and use those funds, and that really helped us keep some people in place, which was awesome. We did enroll for the second round of Baker Ripley, although I have not had any confirmation that any payments came in through that second round. Okay. But it was great to have that. Yeah. And we certainly worked to try to provide other assets. Yeah. Oops.
To keep those collections coming. That's great. So have you changed any when it comes to collecting and your strategy for collecting, and it sounds like y'all are doing a great job. Have you had to change anything when it comes to addressing residents who aren't paying rent?
For sure. We have been very, very accommodating to assisting residents who have had struggles. Early on, we saw more of this back in April, May, and June, We were making payment arrangements up to 6 months out with monthly payments. The vast majority of our residents who participated in those payment arrangements typically paid the rent prior to those agreements terminating. So that was very, that they really appreciated us working with them. Most of them paid before they were required to. So it's been a great benefit to both our residents and ourselves to keep those residents in place and really work to help them as much as we can. We also limited notices to 30 days as opposed to 60 days. And we aren't really requiring them to prove up too much. If they have a COVID related need, we're kind of taking it at face value.
So when the notices, so I guess
and a lot of the
your lease requires a 60-day notice to vacate, but you made a decision to go ahead and shift that to only require a 30-day. Is that what I'm understanding?
If that was requested by a resident that they had a COVID related need to move, and they were at the end of their lease, we were allowing them to move with a 30-day notice. And those that are trying to terminate contracts prior to the end of their contract, we're really working with them to come up with much more flexible arrangements for them, and even foregoing some of the things that we would have typically collected in the past.
And that seems to be, have you had a lot of people leave because of that, or through working with them, you've been able to get them to stay?
We have, most of our move outs from COVID have just been people who did come to the end of their lease and decided at the end of their lease that they needed to make other arrangements. We have had lease breaks due to COVID. I would say on average across my portfolio, since April, I've probably between 15 and 20 of those per property over the last 7 months.
Okay. So then, so when we were talking about payment plans. So is there any techniques that you or your teams, you had to equip them with that was anything different to get them to enter into those payment plans with people? Because, I think a lot of times we get into a rhythm of, rent's due and we're really strict and we follow the schedule, and that's all kind of shifted. So how did you get your team kind of on board?
Well, we had a lot of meetings, a lot of Zoom calls. We gave them very basic parameters to follow so that they were being consistent, so we didn't run into fair housing issues. So we did give them guidelines. So when we were making those payment arrangements for people who were trying to stay in their lease, those payment arrangements, we would agree to a 6-month repayment term with monthly payments, but we'd spread that rent balance out over 6 months. And if we went into the next month and they were trying to make their payments, but they were still having problems and they needed to tack on another month of rent, we made arrangements up to 2 months of rent. Once we got into the third month, we really started having one-on-one conversations with those particular customers to give them additional resources to try to find funds, talk to them about, if they wanted to terminate their lease early, what we could do to help them, get out of their lease with more favorable terms than what the contract says. But for the most part, we've had really good success about making those arrangements and giving the teams those parameters. And my managers call me almost every time they have somebody who's coming in to make a payment arrangement, just to make sure we're being very consistent. And we're doing everything that we can to avoid that person from having to be forced out of their home. It doesn't benefit them and it doesn't benefit us. So if we can be flexible on those payments, we're going to do that.
No, that's great. You make a great point. And so it sounds like, are you still in that payment plan process, even as, these months down the road? And really, I know we wish we had a crystal ball, but if you are, how long do you see yourself, or what are you kind of expecting for the future?
Okay. So for sure, if somebody still comes into the door today and says, for instance, with November rent just around the corner, and they're suddenly in a COVID, restriction rent payment kind of place, we're definitely going to work with them just like we did 6 months ago. We saw the vast majority of these payment arrangements happen very early on. We haven't seen month over month a consistent addition to those payment arrangements. Most of the payment arrangements we put in place several months ago are we have very little outstanding. I think I just got a report this morning from all my properties, and I think I have one new request. But we saw the vast majority of those requests come in much earlier on, and we didn't see those requests coming in month over month in the last
Great.
couple of months.
Sounds like being proactive really helped a lot, not only for you, but for the residents and everybody. So how have you changed any rental criteria when it comes to, accepting new residents that may have a balance or any, job change or whatever that may be? Have you made any adjustments or anything, any additional considerations?
We haven't made any additional considerations. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. If they're moving, we really are making sure that they're currently employed and currently have an ability to pay. So we're not offering any sort of flexibility on that point. When the housing crisis happened back in 2008, we kind of made a shift in our qualifying criteria and saying, we might look at evictions or broken leases a little bit differently than we did in the past, or foreclosures. And we became a little bit more flexible back then. And so I think if we see that long-term COVID has had a negative impact on our renter base, we may very well adjust some of that criteria at that time, because it's all about mitigating risk. It's not about punishing somebody because they had something bad happen in their past. We want to be reasonable. We want to take into consideration that something very unusual and extreme happened. And so that rental criteria is really just about mitigating risk. And if somebody had a bad happen to them, during COVID, and they're back on their feet and they're working, and they overall had a strong credit history, or they overall had a strong rental history, with the exception of that little blip in time, we're going to definitely be, adjusting criteria if we see the need for that.
Okay. No, that makes sense. I like how you put that. I had a couple other questions, but I wanted to touch base with Morgan first. Do we have any questions yet or anything? Because I had some other, I just wanted to keep the conversation going, but before I do, I wanted to check in with you, Morgan.
I don't see any questions at the moment. Our viewers, if you guys do have any questions, right now is your time to ask, and then I'll just interrupt and ask those questions. But Betsy, if you have more questions that you want to get to, go ahead.
Okay. Well, and actually I have a question. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit on leasing. Leasing has changed so much since COVID. How are your leasing agents adapting to their leasing protocols to meet the needs of the customers today?
Our teams have done a phenomenal job. One of the bright points on all this is that I've been kind of trying to encourage them for a few years to really kind of embrace FaceTime tours or Zoom or anything like that, because we do have, especially in Houston, a lot of people who move here from out of state or out of country even, that never come to the property physically. And so being able to utilize the technology out there, and now they were kind of forced to do it. And just like we had lots of meetings and phone calls about rent collections, we also had lots of meetings and phone calls about how to handle those tours remotely, how to really add value to those distance tours, how to use the technology, and also making sure that our teams had the technology. We invested a fair amount of money back in May and June to put additional iPads out there, laptops out there, training and support for the teams to learn how to utilize those. And they've done a stellar job. And yeah, it's been great.
Is there any one big takeaway that you would recommend for someone that's trying to do a better job of shifting into that realm? I mean, any shout out to any certain platform that's really worked, or training technique, or anything for those of us that are still, trying to figure some of that out, I guess you could say.
Sure. Well, having the technology available to the teams to use is certainly a big one. Making that investment in getting the iPads in place, or the smartphones in place, or whatever they need to be able to do a distance tour. shoot, I had another thought too, and it escaped me. But just making sure that technology is in their hand. We have making sure they have a really good lead management software platform is very helpful. We use Power Pro on most of our properties. That's also been, just a great benefit during this time. But making sure that they have the technology and making sure you're taking the time to actually train them on how to do it, because there is a certain aspect of ripping the Band-Aid off and just learning how to do it. It's uncomfortable at first. And we did have some early on resistance from some of our leasing who they didn't want to mess up. They didn't want to look stupid. They didn't know how to walk around with the iPad or how to get a good video, and translate that to something that they could send to a customer. And it's kind of like your first day of leasing in the business, where you just kind of have to jump in and do that first tour. It's the same thing with this digital, digital.
Yeah, it's like,
hear me now? I got
yeah.
Really quick, I have a couple questions that just came in, and I'd love to hear from Shelley and Betsy on these. So Lauren Chambers, she wants to know, how have you been handling residents who are normally late before COVID? Have you been more willing to grant them leniency due to COVID in regards to late fees specifically?
Good question.
It is. You want to take that first? You want me to?
Well, we've been kind of trying to treat everybody the same as far as what we require and what kind of proof we either do or don't require and so forth. So we tried to just be consistent when it comes to that. There have been some of those habitual late payers that have continued beyond and so that we're just starting to have those tougher conversations with them and limiting them, so that they're not taking advantage of the system, but just trying to deal with those on a case-by-case basis.
I agree. I think early on, again, we kind of gave everybody the benefit of the doubt, regardless of their past payment history. And we and surprisingly, I think we thought early on that we were going to have a lot more people try to take advantage of the fact that there's this COVID impact. And fortunately, we didn't see that. We saw a lot of people really trying so hard to do what they are supposed to do under the lease contract. And even the ones that are habitual late payers, we didn't see a whole lot of people trying to take advantage of it, very few.
That's good. And then Stephanie, I'm going to mispronounce your last name, Zambrano. She wants to know, is there another way, I'm guessing outside of rent payments, that you would recommend to try to collect rent from residents? It has been super hard with them saying that they haven't been working.
Wow. That's tough. I mean, there are resources out there aside from Baker Ripley. Just making sure that you understand what's available in your area to provide that rental assistance. But if it's getting to a point where they're just getting into a hole that you don't see them getting out of, it's time to have that kind of really hard conversation with them about, we need to work together to come up with a plan, because we don't want you at the end of this being thousands and thousands of dollars in debt that you're not going to be able to repay. That's then going to impact you long term.
Again, hard conversations, but they're important. Usually the hard conversations are the ones you need to have the most. Yeah. There was a couple of situations where we had some folks that, to Shelley's point, just, we're getting so far behind and there was just no way. So, we actually went as far as to offer a debt forgiveness and said, look, if you just go ahead and go, then we'll, wipe the slate clean, let you start somewhere else once you get back on your feet. Again, to Shelley's point, it's not about punishing anybody. It is what it is. And, chances are we weren't going to see any of that money anyway. So let's just go ahead and shift the gears and get them thinking about, what they can do for right now to get themselves situated, not further in the hole. So,
yeah. And I think that's something that can carry over long term, because I've always had kind of a mindset of, when somebody's moving out and owes me a whole lot of money and it seems like they're not ever going to be in a position to be able to repay that, Even
Mhm.
in a non-COVID world, I'm going to work with those people to let's come up with an agreement of something you can pay, just so that they're not ruined forever. And we do our very best to make our owner whole. And it's kind of a meeting of the middle. And to your point, Betsy, this has really forced us to really do that with these residents. And I think debt forgiveness is a huge part of that, because you're just better off getting possession of that unit and hoping to find another renter that will be able to pay.
So Shelley, you just touched on this. I wanted to ask both of you guys a question. Is it when a resident hasn't paid rent in 2, 3, 4 months maybe, or just a long time, and they're wanting to move, it may or may not be close to their time to move out. In your opinions, would you rather just let that resident go and kind of do that debt forgiveness like you were just talking about, Shelley, and just kind of, letting them go, get out of the lease, out of the unit, or how do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, we've done that. And I think that's kind of what Betsy was saying too. We've certainly done that because, you know, I kind of worry too, like if we were to charge somebody out the ears because they had to break their lease due to
Mhm.
COVID, I mean, there could be some sort of legal ramification of that down the road where, it's not viewed very favorably towards us because we didn't do all that we could to mitigate that person's losses. And again, if it's not going to be collectible for the foreseeable future, and we understand that these are unusual times that created this, we are viewing it very differently than what we would have in the non-COVID world.
Yeah, and even from, just from the business side, I mean, you have to keep the people element. We don't want that resident to continue, the burden that they have, certainly by accruing more past due rent. But at the end of the day, if we're not collecting from a business side, if we're not collecting the rent on the apartment, it's costing us money between any resources that we have to dedicate to servicing the community, the apartment or anything like that, that you really are just better off cutting your losses and letting it sit vacant for a little while you figure out a more somebody that is in a qualified position to take that apartment. So it's a hard kind of, as benevolent as we all want to be, and as, we don't want to, take somebody's roof over their head, so to speak. But, at the end of the day, we've got to think about it from all angles.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, and I've felt this way all throughout my career, that if we try to do the very best to do the right thing by our customer, even if that means having to walk away from some of what we legally have the right to collect, if we do the right thing by the customer, we still end up making more money in the end than we would have if you tell them they're going to have to pay $10,000 and they're never going to have that $10,000. You're never going to see a dime of it. But if you can work out some sort of reasonable arrangement of something they can do, and it works for you to where you're not, completely writing off the whole debt or sending it to collections, you're going to make more money that way. You're going to collect some of that money if you can be reasonable and accommodating to those residents.
That's such a good point, Shelley. That is such a good point. Thank you for that. And thank you to our viewers for asking those questions. We appreciate that. We like hearing, we want to know what questions you guys have. And that pretty much does it for our expert exchange today. Betsy, if you will close us out.
Well, I just want to say thank you again, and we will be back in 2 weeks, and we invite you to come and participate and watch. And thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you so much, Shelley, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye, y'all.
All right. Bye, everyone.